Today's episode is brought to you by SoundCartel. From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. There's some merit to following your gut, but for the big decisions on growth and strategy, how do you keep your emotions in check, and how do you know the choice you make is the right one? It comes down to the data you collect. You don't want to be overwhelmed by too much data, and you don't want to manipulate it either to suit your own biases. So how do you analyse the data effectively? Brad Kasell says it's about making decisions with imperfect data rather than waiting for complete evidence, which is almost impossible to collect. Brad is Principal Technology Strategist Asia Pacific at Domo, the makers of intelligence software. Data, of course, is important, and the ability to read that data, but it's not what drives a business. He's explaining to Chris Ashmore.
You don't want your business to be data-driven. You want your business to be profitable, or you want your business to be efficient, or you want to reduce costs. You don't want to be data-driven just for the sake of it. The data is important, and you want to put it in context. Oftentimes, I see this a lot, where companies collected a lot of data that is just irrelevant, and it oftentimes clouds their decision-making ability because it's confusing, maybe the data is not a high enough quality, or maybe it's just not pertinent to what they're trying to do at the time. So I think data itself is really important, but getting the right data, whether it's relevant or whether it's accurate, is probably more important than just having a whole lot of data for the sake of it. I think, that really talks to that the ability to read the data is more around the ability to apply the data. If it doesn't fit your situation, then it could be worse.
So how do you use the data? How do you examine it to make quality decisions?
A lot of it is, like I mentioned previously, a lot of times companies in the past have collected tons and tons of data on the assumption that sometime in the future it's going to be valuable. And what you really need to do is think about your business and what type of data you need to make effective decisions. Because oftentimes, let's say you're in electricity and you're looking at focusing on things like how do you manage customer churn. That the type of information you need to manage that is completely different than if you or I were sitting up in a hospital bed trying to figure out what's our drug dosage and things like that. So one is determining what data is relevant to the business at hand. And the second part is thinking about your own decision-making process. I think a lot of times, and maybe this is more so in smaller businesses rely on the intuition or the experience of the founder or the visionary or the head of the business. And that can go a long way. That can be very effective. And so making sure that they have the right data that supports them, or worse, that they might resist against, is really the challenge.
You said earlier that the purpose of a business is to be profitable and to grow and make more profit. How can you achieve business growth by using the data effectively?
I think what data is really good at is giving you an objective perspective on your business. A lot of times, especially say, for example, in consumer products, there's a lot of emotion involved. You've always sold these products. You've always sold a certain color or a certain size or a certain packaging. And that just feels like part of the company's culture, their history, and the value proposition. But if you can complement that with data that says, we might love this particular product, but it just doesn't sell anymore. Consumer tastes have changed, the market's changed. So data can provide an objective comparison to what's the truth out there in the market. And then what's really good about that is then a business leader can use the two. They can use their own experience, their own instincts, and they can compare that to the data. And then I used to work a lot with legal professionals. And a lot of times the saying was that the responsibility for the legal team was to tell me what the risks were. Me as the business owner was to decide how to run my business based on those risks. And data is much the same. It's just finding out what's truly happening on the shop floor and then using your own judgment to decide which way to go.
Mazars is an international audit, tax and advisory firm committed to helping clients confidently build and grow their businesses. To find out how Mazars can support your business, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.
It's sort of the point. The data's there to provide objectivity and to leave the emotions aside and focus on that.
Absolutely. And that's really difficult. I think, a good example might be, say, for example, electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are a very polarizing topic, and a lot of people love them. A lot of people hate them. A lot of car manufacturers believe they should sell them or shouldn't sell them. And they look at a company like Tesla and it's way out in front changing the market. But the truth of the matter is do they sell? Are people buying them? And, it's very easy to get caught up in whatever the latest current trend is. And in the case of car manufacturers, you could spend billions of dollars making a huge mistake. So you really need to have some data there to justify, especially when you have significant investments in it. You've got options, so you need to be able to decide which way to go. I think the other example that comes to mind for me is, say, like in a supermarket or consumer products. A lot of times you get high rate of change. The products change daily. Customer trends change by the minute. Oftentimes, you have seasonality, you have supply chain issues. I think maybe a really good example would be what happened over the last few years with COVID. Suddenly businesses went from, if you're thinking about how to achieve growth, if I was a travel company today, if I was Qantas, and if I compared my performance today versus 2 years ago, everyone would think I was an amazing super genius because the business has increased 10,000%. Because, 2 years ago, my business was zero. So, I think that's a good example of treating the data with some kind of context. A lot of companies today, in fact, are struggling with how do they figure out what growth looks like when you have the last couple of years and there's no benchmarks, there's no indicator what growth should even be. So it's really challenging to try and reset and calibrate yourself when the baseline can fluctuate so wildly. It's crazy.
It's hard, isn't it, with controlling the data that is just all over the place and trying to make sense of it all. How do you suggest businesses can integrate it?
That's a really good question. And I think in my experience, I have yet to work with a company or a business that solved this problem. Because what happens is the biggest challenge is that businesses aren't static. Businesses are changing all the time. Either their products change or their customers change or there's mergers and acquisitions and they buy this and they buy that. And so they're constantly changing the types of data that they have and that they need. And so when you try and pull that all together, you might get it all together at a point in time. And then the next thing you know, you've spun off that product line or you're not making those widgets anymore and your data changes. So a lot of the times it's really around two things. One is being flexible, not having to have a perfect data platform, realizing that you're not going to have all of the data all of the time and it's not going to be perfect. And I think the second part is being comfortable with that, having the confidence to make decisions based on incomplete data is the way that you can kind of, you can move past it without kind of getting paralyzed waiting for all the right data at a time. So I think, that's the fundamentals around how do they cope with it. I think the other part a little bit that we talked about before was just making sure that the data is relevant. It's very easy to get caught up with, I can't get a hold of this particular piece of data, or it's the accuracy is not right or the quality is not right. The first part is, do I even need this piece of data at all? If you can simplify your business and strip it down to what's really relevant, then it's not so hard to integrate it because you're just integrating less.
That was Brad Kasell, Principal Technology Strategist APAC at Domo. Business Essentials Daily is a SoundCartel podcast. Producers are Nick Schildberger, Chris Ashmore, Jeff Waters and myself. Technical production by Pete Letts. I'm Nicole Goodman. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more B Daily next week. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.